Good day, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the show on this Sunday, July 24th, 2022. What I'm going to talk about is a very important subject, and it's almost unbelievable. But it would be very much in your interest to listen to what I got to say over the next 20 minutes or so. Where to start? I have to start at the beginning. It all began like around 1913, 1914 with Woodrow Wilson government passing the Federal Reserve Act, and the bankers who went out to Jekyll Island who planned all of this. What they set in motion was a multi-generational ponzi scheme with your money. And why this is so important is it could actually lead to something, a catastrophe that's like has never been seen since the world's beginning until now. A collapse of an empire, something similar to the collapse of the Roman Empire, except we're not living in the world of Rome anymore. We're living in a world with nuclear weapons now. We're living in a world now where people do not have the ability to take care of themselves on a personal basis without the care and aid from services. Things like telecommunications. Just if you cut telecommunications alone, which is like your cell phone, that's telecommunications. Like right now, you being able to go on YouTube, the internet, that's telecommunications. That's how you get information. We're not like we were hundreds of years ago when people spread information through little newspapers that dotted the countryside and word of mouth, or the Pony Express or anything like that. We're in the information age, and if you cut information, people are just naturally going to expire because they do not have correct information, and they start to go into a state of chaos. We're living in a time where you just can't do what you did when the Roman Empire fell, where the people, most of them knew how to do things like farming. You could take a child from that time era, back in the time of the Roman Empire, and you didn't have to teach them how to churn butter. They knew how to churn butter and take milk and turn it into butter or turn it into cheese. These were just skills that they had, farming skills that they had. They knew how to process plant and agricultural and meat and poultry and fish products and things like that, and catch fish from the ocean. People knew how to support themselves. Only thing we know how to do now is go to the grocery store and purchase it. But how do we purchase it? With money, what we call money. And so what happened back in 1913, 1914 is they put it's like putting the wrong kind of yeast or something if you're making up wine. Say you're a winemaker. I use this as an illustration. And you put vinegar in instead of the right type of yeast to make your wine. You're going to ruin all of it, and you're going to have to dump it. This is what they did to our money. They set in motion a Ponzi scheme that ultimately, in the end, destroys the purchasing power of the money. And there's no way around this. And in doing so, they set something in motion that a lot of people went beyond their notice. In 2008, what happened is it started the fuse was lit in 2008. And what I mean by that is the way this monetary system is established, it always requires that you create new debt to service the old debt. In other words, you have to keep expanding the monetary supply. You cannot let it contract. This is the way it's designed. This is the nature of the beast. And so this worked. It worked okay. To a point, it worked okay from the year 1913 all the way up until the year 2008. It worked to a point where the world was expanding. It's not an infinite world, it's a finite world. But we were expanding. Trade was expanding. They were cutting down the rainforests. They were expanding businesses. They were expanding the oil fields. They were digging for new oil. They were constantly expanding businesses around the world. And it was a constant expansion of the world. In 2008, the entire world underwent a contraction. For the first time, it underwent a contraction. And this system is set up so that it cannot contract. So what did they do? They ran in smack into a wall. They had a huge panic situation in front of them where the monetary system and the entire world, the industry and everything that we do started to contract. They had to repair it because this is not set up for that. We're only set up for growth. We're only set up for exponential growth. Always, the GDP relies upon growth. And suddenly, everything started to contract. Well, you know how they fixed it? They continued to expand the monetary supply. Not the real world. Not the businesses. They didn't expand the rainforest. They didn't start to venture out and start to farm on Mars or start to explore the moon for minerals or anything like that. That's not what they did. They couldn't expand the world anymore. We had reached the limit of a finite planet. And the planet, everything, industry and everything was starting to contract. Well, they did expand it to a certain degree. The Chinese did a tremendous expansion within the boundaries of their country. They built cities with no inhabitants, called ghost cities. This helped to expand things after 2008 and helped us get back on our feet. Chinese were tremendously important in helping us get over the 2008 crisis and not have the world go into a chaos then. But in doing so, they've expanded their infrastructure immensely in their real estate markets immensely during those years. Big help they were. They were a huge help to stopping the momentum of the 2008 crushing financial crisis. But the Fed, they played their part too. They increased the monetary supply, in effect fooling the system into thinking that we were still expanding. Because the monetary supply stopped contracting and it started to expand too. All this money for nothing. Lowering interest rates down to the floor for years. But now what's happened is we're reaching the end of all this game that's been played. We're reaching the end now. Because this artificial expansion, China can't do it again. In fact, their real estate market now is pretty much dead, and the people can't even pay their mortgages. People are like, oh, we're not paying this. Unless you build a house and put us in it, we're not paying for a house that's not built. And the banks have already put out that all that money has already been spent of the Chinese mortgages and from an $8 trillion Chinese real estate market that's undergoing collapse right now and is contracting. Our real estate market over here is just being held up by a thread. And, the Fed has decided, we're going to cut because there's inflation out there. We're all in danger now because the entire global financial system is ready to contract again like it did in 2008. And this time, if they try to pump the tremendous amounts of liquidity into the system like they did before, they're going to bring about tremendous amounts of inflation. It's called hyperinflation. And it's just as bad as what they're trying to stop. The deflation is equally powerful on the other side of this. that the system could deflate and contract. And now we're caught in the middle. And so what they did to cover all this up in 2008 was only a patch. It's like a person that gets a big gash on their leg or something. And they continue on for a number of days because they just put a big bandage over top of a great big gash in their leg. And they don't pay any attention to it any longer. They just rely upon that bandage. And that's what the Fed did in 2008. They bandaged the system up. And it's been running ever since. But it's now got gangrene. It's starting to stink under the bandage. And they're still ignoring it mostly. And they're just still papering it over. Right now, they're in the bond market. And what they're doing is they're injecting liquidity on one side of the system. That's why the 10 years fell over the past weeks. It was touched 3.25 and now it's fell back to, what is it, under 2.8? That's a big drop. That's a lot of liquidity that they've somehow mustered into the system behind closed doors. But on the other side of this coin, we got them on the overnight rate raising it 75 basis points. And then I'm talking about raising another 75 basis points. And then they raised it 50 basis points. It's starting to get up there. And then they're talking about quantitative tightening. So on one hand, they're saying, okay, we're going to take liquidity out of the system to fight inflation. But at the same time, on the other side of that coin, on the other hand, they're still pumping money in to the system that's causing inflation. And this should tell you something. This should tell you that the Fed is in crisis mode right now. And the situation that happened in 2008, the deleveraging of the system, was a natural phenomenon because you just can't keep pumping money in endlessly and increasing the credit, increasing the monetary supply without at a certain point it wanting to contract. And so now we got these equal polar opposite forces at play. A tremendous amount of energy that's working toward contraction. But at the same time, we've got all of this liquidity that's working toward expansion. And so we're seeing anomalies in parts of the economy where prices are rising on one thing and falling on something else. That's why I say this is a collapse of an empire. And it has to collapse in one of these two directions. Most likely it's going to be inflationary because they lack the resolve of what it takes to really continue with the cutting even after the system starts to fall. And we're right on the precipice of the system falling. See what a troubled time this is? And all this going on, and an awful lot of people are completely unaware that there's any problem. They think the financial system's fine because they can use their greenbacks. Primarily the US dollar still functions. If you've got a fistful of dollars, you can do something. And if you don't have a fistful of dollars, you can't do nothing. There's still a certain amount of function there. But that function could be eroded extremely quickly because we're on the front side of this exponential curve that we were set on back in 1913. This is an exponential function, so it's not an even line. It does a hockey stick toward the end where prices tend to increase more rapidly, and this in turn causes people to want to spend their money as fast as they get it because they realize the longer they keep it, it's like a hot potato. The longer you hang on to it, the more your money's going to lose value. And when this starts to be realized, really realized across the population, then they start to spend the money. They don't save. You don't get any savers anymore at that point. Plus, at the same time, the way this economy is disintegrating, you're going to have millions of people who just cannot cover all the bases. Their income is not going to be large enough to cover the cost of inflation. There's going to be millions of people. They're going to have hard choices. Do I pay the rent this month or do I feed myself this month? And there's going to be a certain period of time in the very near future where these people are not going to sit and take it any longer. They're not going to sit quietly at home and suffer. They're going to get out there and they're going to make themselves heard. That, hey, I do not have enough money to cover my basic costs of living. And I'm not going to sit here quietly and starve to death. And so then the government will have to react. Because you just can't have 50 million Americans starve. Or say 5 million Canadians starve on the side of the street. I mean, we're not a third world country here. But we're rapidly becoming a third world country because we got poor leadership. But it all boils down to this Ponzi scheme in the end I'm trying to tell you guys about. Where they had to constantly create more and more debt in order to service the debts from previous years. And you can never pay it off. And it's something so simple. Why this works this way is because when they originally create the debt, say you're a bank and you're going to borrow $100 from the Fed. They create the $100 and they hand it to you and they say, okay, here's your loan of $100 into the system. But they don't create the amount of interest that $100 is going to have paid on it in order to pay that $100 off. So let's say you're dealing with 1% interest. That means that you're going to owe at the end of the year $101. So if all you got's the original 100, you can't pay $101 because they never created that $1. Now, such a thing as accruing interest. It means the interest grows over time. And this Ponzi scheme's been going on for over 100 years. They never created that money to pay the interest. So if you try to pay off the debt, you're still going to be insufficient funds. You're going to hit a point where there's still more owed than what you have. But that money's never been created, so it can't possibly be paid off. And so it extinguishes the money supply to try to pay off the money supply. So the only way to pay off these previous debts and the interest owed on these previous debts is to borrow more and more and more. But if you borrow more, the money's worth less. And there's no place to go in this situation. It has to, in the end, lead to an entirely either one of two directions. Either like default by defaulting on the treasuries and defaulting on the U.S. payment of debts, which is what the debt ceiling is all about. They keep raising it, but say they don't raise it. Say they decide to do the right thing, pay off all the debts, all the money disappears. Just basically was what I said. Because there's only like a couple $1 trillion to cover just the U.S. debt alone. The debt that they're showing is like 31 trillion now? And then the unfunded liabilities, a couple $100 trillion more? And there's only like, boil it down to 1 trillion like it's $1. Okay? So the United States would probably owe like $250 if 1 trillion was only $1. That would be 250 units that they would owe of that $1 trillion each unit. So say 250. So they owe 250. And what do they got on hand that they could, if they grabbed all the cash in America from everybody's pocket, they could probably scrap together like two. It'd be like 2 trillion or something. And there's no more. So where did all the money go? It's a Ponzi scheme. It goes to pay off the previous debts. And they just keep enough money in the system to cover the banking system, so that if you go into the bank, they can actually give you, if you say, well, I want to withdraw $100, they can give you that 100. They just keep enough money in the system to cover those people, few people. And it's very few now, it's getting fewer, and this is why there's less cash in the system now than there's ever been. because they're just keeping enough in there to cover those few people that come in and say, well, I want my cash, please. And because they're just got enough money to cover those people, they don't like it anymore when you come into the bank and you say, I want my cash. They do not like you because you are counterproductive to what they're trying to do. They're trying to have a cashless system here where all the money's just digits on a screen. It's all actually meaningless in the end. And can't you see where this whole system is unstable? The money itself is unstable, and everything we do every day involves transactions. When you get up in the morning and you put that McMuffin or whatever you have in the microwave and your tea, your coffee, that's a transaction because you paid for that with your money. And nobody give it to you for free. And if the money stops working, it means you're not going to have your McMuffin in the morning. And your electricity is not going to work to even run the microwave. And you're not going to have your cup of tea or your coffee because money doesn't work anymore. And this can happen rather suddenly when you've created a debt-based Ponzi scheme that's it's over-leveraged and ready to freeze. And the Fed's playing these silly games out there right now. The stupidest games in the world they're playing is trying to trigger some sort of a market crash or whatever with their actions. But they don't really want it. On the other side, they don't really want it because that's why they're trying to support the bond market on the long end of the yield curve. They're doing yield curve control. You got the 10-year right now, and you see the rates falling on the 10-year. So they're supporting it over here. But over here, they're saying the big talk and everything else that they want to fight inflation and everything else. So they're risking putting us into a recession. But it wouldn't be a recession. It would be a deleveraging event, which is also dangerous because the money itself is involved. It could stop working. The money could stop working overnight because it could just disappear from the system. And then they're faced with, what are we going to do? We got to create more money into the system and get this thing going again. But they can't do that without putting us into hyperinflation. So there you go, guys. You see how dangerous what we're in, the time we're in. And this has taken away all the other dangers of things like war. Where, we got countries like China and Russia. They're just building nuclear weapons as fast as they can. China's got their eyes on Taiwan. They want the Pacific, South China Sea. Very aggressive over that. They don't want anybody in there messing around. And they're doing all kinds of stuff in those Spratly Islands. Gosh knows what they're doing down there. And then we got Russia over there, building up of armaments and everything else, building these new Satan IIs that can fly halfway around the world. And they got like 10 inside a MIRV, what's called a MIRV, a multiple re-entry vehicle. They can come in from the atmosphere doing like Mach 8. And boom, 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 boom. It's over. And they're building them as fast as they can. And China and Russia are merging together now with one sole purpose. The BRICS want to take over the world's financial system. And quietly they're over there and they're sneaking in their own monetary system that's going to be completely separate from us because they know that we're sliding off into oblivion. I would say people out there that are prepping are right. You're darn right to prep. And you need to have a little bit of constitutional silver. You need to have a little bit of real. They're even talking about real physical silver. Put it in a sock or something, and dimes are great, silver dimes. And you should have a little bit of gold, maybe a couple little rings or something, and have a little bit of paper money put away, because at least it's real. Might not help you much if the system folds up, but at least it's real. And have some food and bottled water and medicine put away for yourself. You know, and there's just so much to all this. So preppers are not stupid, and I think, you know, for years we were ridiculed, but we knew what we were talking about. For years we've been telling you guys to prep, and it is coming now at this point. I mean, we're on an exponential. This financial system's not going to last that much longer. So thank you guys for listening to my show. Like and subscribe. And we'll catch you with more Delta Report coming up soon. I got everything working again, boys. I got the cameras working and everything, as you can see. And I enjoy doing these shows for you guys. I really enjoy and really appreciate my audience out there. And been through a little bit of hard time with my channel, you know. But we're bouncing back, and we're bouncing back hard. Bye-bye, guys.